5 years ago, out of the blue, we got a call from a fella in Yale Law School who was running what was called the Thurman Arnold Project and putting on a conference called Big Ag and Antitrust. And this was before antitrust was an issue that people within our population understood. And so the gentleman asked if he was gleaning knowledge. He was asking for experts around the country to submit white papers for this particular conference so he could learn more about, he and others could learn more about antitrust in the agriculture industry. And that is how I came to know our next speaker, his name is Austin Frerick, and he is an expert on agricultural and antitrust policy. He worked at the Open Markets Institute. He worked with the U.S. Department of Treasury and with the Congressional Research Service. He's a seventh-generation Iowan and a first-generation college graduate with degrees from Grinnell College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And in 2024, just a few years after he hosted this conference at Yale Law School, he became an author and wrote his book called Barron's Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry. And the book profiles several magnates within the food industry to illustrate the corruption created from the concentration of power. His book, Barron's, has received universal acclaim, including a coveted starred review from both Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews. And Kirkus Reviews named his book the best book of 2024. And with that, I give a warm welcome to Austin Frerick.
Thanks, Bill. Actually, before we get going, let me tell you a little story on Bill. So when he presented his paper, can we do the slides up top? There we go. So when I asked Bill to present the state of the beef markets at this conference, and he showed a version of this slide. I'm not kidding when I say this slide was a thing everyone talked about after the conference. I think this is a nerdy example of the phrase, a picture says 1,000 words. This graph right here is the best example in the American food system of monopoly, cartel, whatever you want to call it. For those of you who haven't seen it before, that red line is what you guys get paid for steer price, and the blue is what people pay for beef at the store. And you see in 2015 that gap emerge. And that is just classic monopoly behavior. After Bill presented, I remember seeing all these Yale faculty just having their jaws dropped, being like they did not realize how bad this is. And keep in mind that gap right there is money out of your pockets, and not even just out of your pockets, it's money out of rural America. And what's even wild to me is that McDonald's is the largest buyer of beef in the world. McDonald's even thinks the beef packers are gouging them. But to step back for a second, so my book, I profiled 7 robber barons in the food system. Number one, I wanted to use the term robber baron to show people we've been here before. What we're seeing now is what we saw a century ago, and we've dealt with this before. I just think we need another Teddy Roosevelt moment. And each one of these robber barons I use to tell a bigger story. So for example, Cargill's my grain baron, but that chapter is really about the Farm Bill. Whereas like Driscoll's, they're my berry baron. That chapter is really about how most produce now in America has moved offshore. But before I get going, I want to show you a few slides. And this is always the first slide I show folks. So big ag will justify what it's doing to people by, well, this makes cheap food. And keep in mind, this is USDA data. If you actually use USDA data per person, Americans spend more money on food than people in Italy, Germany, Japan, France. Trust me, what $1 gets you in Italy, it's very different than $1 here. If you want to be just nerd out for a second, what industry will tend to say is, well, percent of income, what Americans spend on food is cheap. That's factually true. That's 6.8%. But what we've seen is so much of the income growth in America is being captured by the top bracket. What matters to most Americans is that $3,694. Here's the thing. We shouldn't be shocked. I really do think the food markets are the most concentrated space in America. My buddy Pete Hardin, he's a dairy guy in Wisconsin. At the same conference, I asked him to do a paper on milk markets in New England. Because even when we talk about these markets, we use national figures, especially meat and dairy, this is local. Because you're not going to take milk from New Mexico and sell it in Maine. He documented how one company has an 85% market share in milk in New England. And I don't need a PhD in economics to know you're not paying a fair price for milk in those markets. On top of it, Bloomberg Law, 2 or 3 years ago, right before Thanksgiving, did this story on how every protein in America, including salmon and tuna, was under investigation for price fixing, except turkey. Then 2 weeks later, turkey was under investigation. But we shouldn't be shocked. When there's only 3 or 4 players in a market, it's really easy to act like a cartel. So, back in the day when companies wanted to collude on price, they used to meet up at hotels like this. They'd get together in a hotel room. We're in a different era now. With big data, have you heard of AgriStats? Companies basically share their data and allows you to collude without colluding in a room. So this graphic is all the bigger protein companies in America, the little symbols they do, and all the data sharing they do. You might have seen this in the news where a lot of large landowners or renters are sharing their data on prices in cities, and then they can raise the prices on rent for people. This is becoming rampant in America right now, this data collusion through big data sets. And the other thing, too, I came to realize writing this book is, to be blunt, every commodity has a go-to hack academic. What I mean by that is, so there's a really good documentary called Inside Job. It's about how the Great Recession happened. And one of the things they found were certain academics were taking money from the banks, writing research saying, oh, deregulation's good for the banks, and not disclosing that. So a lot of these academic journals came up with policies saying, if you're taking money from Bank of America, you have to say it. Well, this fellow Iowan, Kate Conlow, did this paper where in agriculture economics, the corruption here is rampant and no one's really enforcing these disclosure policies. She highlights one academic, Timothy Richards, at, I believe, Arizona State, who brags about on his website all the industry money he's taking. He edits these academic journals, doesn't disclose it, then he's the one that goes on the news saying you're not being gouged. It really corrupts the public discourse here. And finally, and I realized this writing the book, is this system is making bad tasting food. Especially meat and dairy inputs matter. The New York Times did a butter tastings and they rated that Kerrygold butter #1. I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's like gold packaging. It's doing really big numbers in the grocery store right now. Here's the thing, that's just the way we used to do butter in America, cows on pasture. Most butter you eat now is coming from industrial farms in like Arizona, New Mexico, and that really impacts the taste. So, I'm not gonna talk too much on this baron. This is my hog baron. This is the one that started the whole thing. This hog farmer, they do about 5 million hogs a year. They are the most powerful political person in Iowa. This whole book started because I was in a dive bar in Des Moines, Iowa in 2018, and I'd heard not only had they given the governor of Iowa $300,000 for her campaign, that they had a home in the rich part of Des Moines and a home in Naples, Florida, and they flew back and forth between on a private jet with the words, "When pigs fly." Which, first of all, I thought that was great copy, but what a powerful symbol what happened to Iowa in my lifetime. Because I was really curious. You don't see animals when you drive Iowa anymore. You see cattle and that's about it. And so this is part of his operation. So this is his headquarters near Jordan Creek Mall in Des Moines. It looks like a suburban dentist clinic. And then you see one of his operations, one of his confinements. And you just look at that photo, and to me, that looks like the New Jersey Turnpike. That land is so dead, so devoid of life. And kind of an undercurrent of my book is, who is a farmer? Is this a farmer? If that's your farm office? And the other thing to keep in mind with pork is our pork consumption in America is basically flat, but we're producing more and more hogs. So for example, Iowa does 25 million hogs in a year. These things defecate 3 times more than humans, so that's manure of 75 million people. That's Iowa, Illinois, and Texas combined. I literally was reading today in the Des Moines Register, Des Moines is on a water advisory because the water is so polluted. There's a cancer crisis in Iowa. Iowa has the 2nd highest cancer rate. And it's all for more hogs. And here's the thing, it's for export. mainly to Mexico and China. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth destroying rural America, rural Iowa to feed China? So Cargill. I have to be honest with you, I did not plan to write about Cargill. Cargill is one of those companies I kind of saw everywhere growing up. It was next to my church, next to my soccer field, but I never really knew what they did. Here's the thing with Cargill. They're the largest private company in America. They are bigger than the Koch brothers. You need to think of Cargill like the modern day version of Standard Oil, Rockefeller Standard Oil. They move 1 in 3, 1 in 4 grains globally. Check out this quote from one of their brochures. We are the flour in your bread, the wheat in your noodles, the salt on your fries. We are the corn in your tortillas, the chocolate in your dessert, the sweetener in your soft drink. We are the oil in your salad dressing and the beef, pork, or chicken you eat for dinner. We are the cotton in your clothing and the backing on your carpet and the fertilizer in your field. First of all, that's beautiful prose. But that's power. Just to put their power in context, what they do in revenue each year is equal to the state tax revenue of all the states in green. So I use this chapter, as I mentioned earlier, to tell the story of the Farm Bill. To me, the original Farm Bill, I think of it like Goldilocks. It comes out of the Dust Bowl. How do you produce just enough of a crop and not too much? So you get some subsidy, but then it was tied to conservation. You had to take land out of production, and it was also limited. You can only get so much. Here's the thing, Cargill hated it. They thought FDR was Marxist. They thought it was evil, because they want to move and process as much grain as possible. But it turns out this is actually really good for business. Healthy markets are good for business. But what you see is a systematic attack on the Farm Bill. And I really focus on the 1996 Farm Bill, because to me that's where it goes off the rails. Now it's about overproducing grains as much as possible, and it picks favorites. You grow corn, you're gonna get a lot of subsidy. You grow carrots, you get nothing. And the best example to me is crop insurance. Again, this is stuff most of you probably know, but like crop insurance is not what most Americans think it is. It's not for rainy day funds. It's for low prices, where 60% of your premium is paid for by taxpayers. And here's the thing. Unbeknownst to most people, like Bill Gates is actually one of the largest owners of farmland in America, and there's no limit. So he can get as much crop insurance as he wants. And this, to me, is one of my favorite graphs to show the failure of USDA. This is for every dollar you spend at the store, what goes back to the farmer. We see that after those New Deal reforms, more than 50 cents on the dollar went back to the farmer. Now we're at a record all-time low, like 11 or 12 cents. So imagine what rural America would be if more than half its money went back to it. That's the thing I've grappled with, especially in Iowa, is the land's producing the most it's ever produced, and none of that money is staying here. It's almost like it's an extraction colony. And the other thing, too, to keep in mind is this system, because it's picking favorites, it makes healthy food expensive. It takes money now to be healthy in America. And this academic, that's her big argument, is it's so much of the obesity crisis in America is rooted in this oversupply of corn. And this is it's kind of hard to understand, but I love this graph because it is what percent of farms grew this crop. And what you see basically a few decades ago, a lot of farms, you'd have different crops going. I almost think of it as like a retirement portfolio. And that was kind of the beauty of it, is one crop creators, we have other income streams. What this Farm Bill now does is it pushes people to do one or two things. And that makes you incredibly fragile. No one would put all your retirement money into one stock, but that's essentially what we're asking farmers to do. Again, because I really do think the Farm Bill now is built for Wall Street and no one else. It's designed for Pepsi. It's designed to make chips and pop as cheap as possible, but not for farmers or for healthy food for Americans. And finally, I end this chapter with, I originally thought of Cargill like Standard Oil. I actually now think of Cargill as the best example of the 19th century British Empire. The sun never sets on Cargill. And here's this little story in the Financial Times from 10 years ago where, just to show you like a little nugget of their power, in response to a civil war that killed 250,000 people in Colombia, I believe, the country enacted a thing saying you can only own so much land. Well, Oxfam discovered not only had Cargill exceeded that limit, it exceeded by 36 times using secret shell companies. So my next Baron's Coffee, JAB. It's a secret German family. I'm not going to talk too much on it, but this is my Monopoly chapter. It's kind of like the history of Monopoly, which, fun little fact, The first anti-monopoly laws in the world come from farmers in Iowa. So this next slide I'm about to show you is they now sell more coffee than Starbucks, but they did not sell a single bean of coffee until 2012. They bought all these brands. They bought your Panera, your Krispy Kreme, your Brugger's Bagels, your Pret a Manger, Einstein's, and then even those little Keurig cups they bought. They called this a roll-up in finance. They saw a competitive market. They threw their money at it to get a dominant position. On top of it, when they bought the little Keurig cups, they got Dr. Pepper and all these other brands. And this, to me, is a really good example in the food system of this illusion of choice. You see what you see in what the average American sees in the grocery store of all these brands, most people don't realize it's really just a few companies. So Fairlife. So this is my check-off chapter. This is one of the hardest chapters to write because I was so determined to talk about checkoffs. I think checkoffs control the conversation about food in America. And I don't think we can really make meaningful change until we deal with them. And so I'm using the story of Fairlife to talk about checkoffs. So you might have seen Fairlife in the store. Coke recently bought it. It's doing blockbuster numbers. To quote one Coke executive, they view it as bougie milk. It's twice the price of milk for half the volume. Young men love it because the protein content's really high, and it has a really, really long shelf life. You go to any gym in America, you'll see tons of these core power things. So let me tell you about Mike and Sue Mikulski. So you have to keep in mind with these people is there is a degree of brilliance, business brilliance you have to respect. They saw the coming water crisis. So they started off as farmers in California, moved to New Mexico, and I believe in like 2004 moved to Northwest Indiana, Fair Oaks Farms. They were able to buy 20,000 acres at once. And the only reason they were able to do that was this was supposed to be a third Chicago airport that never panned out. And I noticed driving around their fields 2 years ago, I kept seeing canals everywhere. And I've never seen canals around cornfields. So I started researching and looking it up. Turns out this used to be known as Everglades of the North. Lake Michigan used to overflow into this area. It's a big marshland. Teddy Roosevelt used to go hunting here. So I don't know if you should even be doing row crops here, let alone intensive dairies. So now in this area, there's 35,000 cows. Those cows defecate as much in a day as the city of Austin, Texas. All the canals around the operation are impaired. And you can tour it. You can hop on this little cow van, you get inside of it, they tell you how happy the girls are. It's a whole complex, actually. It's one of the largest tourist attractions in the state of Indiana. There's a big ice cream store here. There's like a museum. There's a rock climbing wall, things for kids, another restaurant. And then they just built a Marriott over here that's like cow themed. This whole thing was financed by checkoff money. So Mike and Sue originally hated the checkoffs because when they developed Fairlife, generic milk was their competition. So why pay to advertise their competition? Because the brilliance of Mike and Sue was they saw what happened to the hog farmers in Iowa in the 90s. They didn't want to go down like that. So they wanted a branded premium product for the suburban consumer. But they didn't want to pay into their competition. So they secretly financed lawsuits that went all the way up to the Supreme Court to abolish the checkoffs. Here's the thing, they lost. But it seems to me like they then made peace with the checkoffs and got in bed with them. They have a seat on a checkoff board. This whole thing was paid for by checkoff. Be careful here. A portion of this was paid for by checkoff money. So keep in mind, this thing is advertising a production model driving family farmers into bankruptcy. So they're taking money from family farmers and using it against them. They also use checkoff money to finance Fairlife itself. History of the checkoffs really quick is they come out of the New Deal. Florida was the first one. Drink more Florida orange juice. Kind of like a lot of things, they start off with really good intentions. They were small. Most of them, there's like 25 of them in America now. Most of them they're not of concern. There's a Christmas tree checkoff, there's a popcorn checkoff. They come because farmers literally checked a box, you pay into a pot of money to advertise your good. Hand out free samples at the fair. The meat and dairy ones are a league of their own. The one that actually scares me the most is pork, because the largest butcher of hogs in America is the WH Group of China. They also own the most hogs. So the voice of the pork checkoff is really the voice of a Chinese multinational. But they're basically, the dairy one's really concerning because it's basically a massive pot of money with very little oversight at USDA. We don't know how much money's in these. People estimate like $1 billion a year. Dairy is maybe around 600 million. By law, they are required to file a report to Congress every year. And turns out the secretaries of agriculture keep forgetting to do that. And a lot of it is they realized, so you might know of the dairy checkoff for most famously being the Got Milk campaign. They realized that didn't work. Milk consumption kept going down. What I argue is they realized a lot of it is used to finance junk science, ethanol in airplanes, stuff like that. In dairy, a lot of it's used to finance these manure digesters, where when a cow defecates on land, she's fertilizing her feed. When you put her indoors, not only do you need to use fossil fuels to grow her feed, it creates additional methane gas when from pooling the manure. So Mike and Sue realized, this is actually they want to get ahead of the story. So they use checkoff money to finance a lot of this junk science and get subsidies for these manure digesters. So keep in mind, family farmers don't have this issue, so their money is being taken from them to used against them. So Fairlife you might have seen this a few years ago, they had a massive animal welfare scandal. They actually just had another one in Arizona. But they saw a little divot from the scandal, but their sales keep rising. I mean, this is the thing with this animal abuse stuff is, take this one right here. You're doing dairy in Arizona, in Phoenix. No one's happy. The worker's not happy, the cow's not happy in 100-some degree heat. You're bringing out the worst of everyone. And finally, I end this chapter with, so Mike and Sue have been on dirty jobs. They talk about, they're good dairy farmers. But I discovered they claim residency at the Ritz-Carlton in Puerto Rico. Are you a farmer if you live at the Ritz-Carlton? Most likely they did this because if you live in Puerto Rico for most of the year, you don't pay capital income taxes. They recently sold Fairlife to Coke. I'll let you guess what they're doing there. And finally, what's scary about these industrial dairies is it's very labor intensive. And a lot of times, these dairy operators are also the landlords for these workers. So, here's a story where they put 12 workers to a 2-bedroom room. You put a bunch of 20-year-old men who are dealing with unhappy cows and an unhappy environment shoved into this, you're just asking for trouble. And also keep in mind, I can't say this enough, the family farmer cannot compete on price against this model, against someone with these operating costs. And I also discovered going through OSHA records, a worker died inside one of these dairy facilities. He got sucked into the manure digester. It was never reported. He only paid $10,000 fine. He was a father of 3. Driscoll's. Part of this goes back to the farm bill being built for Wall Street. Is that produce farmer gets nothing in the farm bill. They really don't. But what it does is it crowds out. It pushes everyone to do corn. So any labor-intensive thing in America has really moved offshore. And that's the whole point of this chapter. So fun fact about Driscoll's. Driscoll's grows they sell 1 in 3 berries in America. They don't actually grow a single berry. They contract out production, usually to countries outside of America, where you can exploit labor and environmental regulations, where there's been tons of reporting of children picking berries for children. Keep in mind, the family farmer who has to follow the law here for labor and environment, you cannot compete on price against that kind of production model. And you just see 40% of your vegetables now and 60% of your fruit comes from outside of America. And also I should say, this makes bad tasting food. That berry is not engineered for taste, it's engineered for durability. So JBS Foods. JBS Foods is not only the largest meat packer in America, they're the largest meat packer in the world, they're the largest meat packer the world's ever seen. This story is wild in a way that I didn't even realize how wild it is until I started researching it, because it got lost. A lot of this went down in 2020, right before the election. So let me set the scene for you. This is the vice president's home of Brazil. This is the president at the time. He was living in the vice president's house because he thought his house was haunted. One of the brothers, the founders, got caught by the government of bribing over 1,800 Brazilian politicians to get cheap money to buy a bunch of American meat companies. He made a plea deal to record bribing the president of Brazil at the time. So when this news came out, allegedly he engaged in insider trading on his plea deal because he knew his stock would go down. I have to use the words allegedly a lot here because they tend to settle. So they are the number one in beef, number one in pork, number two in pork, number one in chicken, number one in leather. These are all the brands they own. This is slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you notice, their name's not on a single one. You could be buying their product and not know. The one that got me was this one, Cedar River Farms. I was eating at a place in DC called Old Ebbitt Grill, and they bragged about how all their beef was, the restaurants do our beef is, they say who they're sourcing from. They said it was from Cedar River Farms. I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So I was like, oh, let me have some Cedar Rapids beef. I've never heard of this brand, but sure. I go home and look it up. It's a fake local brand. It's all based in Greenlee, Colorado. But it's exploiting the images. It's exploiting the power of people doing it right. You might have seen these two. They're more on the East Coast right now. JBS is building all these fake local meat stores to kind of capitalize on that consumer goodwill. So when you read this chapter, it's kind of funny. I view JBS as like a kid that's never been punished, so they keep pushing the envelope because they never really face consequences. They just get slapped on the wrist, they pay a fine. They bribe politicians, they pay a fine. My anger at this chapter is actually at Secretary Tom Vilsack. I think addressing the meat markets is one of the most bipartisan things in America, especially after COVID. And the fact is, those last 4 years, every major meat company made an acquisition. They got bigger, including Walmart's entrance into the meat markets. On top of it, his whole theory of change was, let me throw $1 billion of taxpayer money to finance new startups, which I asked his team, there's no example in American history of that working. On top of it, keep in mind, this company's, JBS has been alleged to bribe meat inspectors, to hire 12-year-olds to work in slaughterhouses, to bribe politicians. Do you think for a second they're gonna let you get market access? And so what you're starting to see is a lot of these companies are, I wish them the best, but a lot of them are starting to go belly up because they're going up against these most ruthless actors. In Iowa, a chicken company went belly up last fall. And first of all, there were stories on the news being like, come get a free chicken. When there was millions of chickens, not enough people came. So the state had to then spend millions of dollars to liquidate all those chickens. And on top of it, he kept giving USDA money to this cartoonishly corrupt company. Another thing too, even at this current administration, the largest political donor is JBS. One of the first things the Secretary of Agriculture did was speed up the kill lines in these slaughterhouses. This is just pay to play. And Bill said something really interesting on Fox News Business I encourage you to watch. I didn't know this and blew my mind is how much beef is being imported right now in American markets. Look at that massive increase from Brazil. That's more than double in a year. We're not even filling our own needs of beef. We're letting all these foreign markets bring in their beef. And keep in mind, a lot of this beef is not done ethically. It's done by slave labor and Amazon rainforest. On top of it, the administration in their budget proposal wants to gut the Packers and Stockers Act that oversees these markets. And the last baron in my book is Walmart. You know what's funny when I started doing this is I didn't think of Walmart as a grocery store. So Walmart owns Sam's Club. Walmart sells 1 in 3 groceries. 60% of Walmart sales comes from groceries. Here's the thing. They don't need to make money on Walmart. That's the beauty, the business brilliance of Sam Walton. He gets you in the store, so you buy, because you grocery shop all the time. He makes his money when you walk over and buy Christmas wrapping paper or tennis balls. The Walmart family is the richest in the world. They own 2 NFL teams. They're the largest employer in America. And here's the thing with Walmart. This is a weird thing to say. I thought of them as the closest thing we've ever had in America to a Soviet Union-style Politburo. You don't negotiate with Walmart. It's supply and command. They have so much market power. Walmart even has this rule that I found fascinating, and I didn't understand at first. I had to ask grocery people. No more than 30% of your sales can come from Walmart if you supply to Walmart. And what people explained to me was this is a supply chain risk management strategy on Walmart's end. Walmart knows it's such a vulture that basically you're lucky if you sell to them at cost. So if you go over that 30%, you put yourself at the risk of bankruptcy. So it wants you on life support, but doesn't want to kill you. And it even publishes a list. Look at these big brands who are close to that line, letting them know we're watching. And the other thing it does in grocery is they call it the waterbed effect, because companies basically sell to Walmart at cost or loss. They have to charge other people higher. So it disadvantages your other grocery stores. And then there's this whole game. I had a grocery person tell me, you got to think of a grocery store like mafioso capitalism. You might have heard, so when you see a pasta shelf, companies will pay for placement. Sliding fees is what they call them. There's this whole game going on over eye level. Or if you ever search online on Amazon or Walmart, you'll see sponsored by. It's the same thing. The scary thing now is, have you seen this TV maker, Viso? Walmart just bought it because they want the ad money. So people stream, you get ads, you don't realize it's coming from Walmart. Well, Walmart doesn't do sliding fees to its credit, but it's doing it indirectly through this. So it turns out, just so happens if you buy ads on Walmart TV, you get good product placement. It's pay to play. And keep in mind what this does is it makes it really, really hard for new brands to break in. It's why you see more flavors of Oreos and like not new brands. And the thing with Walmart too is there was this guy from Iowa State who studied what happened to Iowa when Walmart first came. And it's not like you buy more milk. What used to be 5 stores you go to becomes 1. You shift your consumption. And that's what Walmart's goal is, to capture every dollar of your paycheck. So these basically are banks. It has pharmacy, gas stations, auto tires. They're trying out healthcare clinics, and they're trying out vet clinics. So first they killed downtown, then they killed the mall. Now they're probably going to kill the strip mall. All for this one family. So here's the thing. So I know that was dark. I really believe you got to study how we got to this moment. And what do? I think we're at the end of a laissez-faire moment, and we got to start thinking about what should these systems be. The biggest thing I think we should do is put animals back on the land, especially hogs. Is rural America is healthier when there's middle-class family farms. To be honest with you, I think most grain production, corn and soy, will be robotic soon, and that's not bad. But there's only so many cows on pasture one person can look after. It makes a better tasting product, and it's better for rural America, and it's better for the environment. The second thing are bright line rules. This is such a simple thing, but never forget the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. Competitive markets are hard. They're ruthless. You want to get to a place where you have a dominant market position because you get a little cream on top. So how do you structure these in a way where you stop this massive consolidation? The best example to me is a packer ban, which basically says you cannot own the animals you slaughter once you hit a certain size. There's been efforts to do this at the federal level. Iowa actually has this law in the books. We don't enforce it. Iowa cut a deal with Smithfield, WH Group, of Shanghai, 20 years ago not to enforce it as long as they cut a little check to Iowa State. I encourage you to see if your state has it, and if they have it, push them to enforce it. Because there's a lot of laws on the books that are not being enforced right now. Second, this is my big hope is, as we phase out this old system, you got to bring up the new system, and institutional buyers are going to be the thing. Schools, to me, are the best examples of this. Schools buy a lot of food, and they're consistent. And it's also good politics. Like, all beef served in South Dakota should be from South Dakota ranchers. Same with milk, same with this other stuff. This is just a little program I heard about in northern Wisconsin where, historically on Native American tribes, we just give them surplus government food. What they're doing now is buying from native farmers, giving native food to native people. Bison, wild rice, things like that. Also, it's good. It's a feel-good story. Open your newspaper and you read that. People want that right now. They want hope. They want to see Americans being good to each other. And the other thing, too, is we need to really rethink the Farm Bill. I think we should subsidize farm practices, not crops. We've got to stop picking favorites. Let farmers decide what's best for land. Here's all these different programs. You pick what's best for land. You decide what's best. But right now, we're putting the weight on the scale, and it's creating this really distorted system. Fifth, and this one's kind of hard to talk about to some people, is domestic ownership. So we used to have laws in the books that if you owned a TV station or radio in America, you had to be an American. And I think we should have the same conversation in the food, especially meat. Most of these meat companies, they're not even foreign owned, they're foreign backed state monopolies. Like, take WH Group of China. Pork is really important to the Chinese diet. So they give a ton of cheap state money to this company. And the American companies, you're not competing on a level playing field. The other thing, too, is we need to rethink USDA. By every metric, USDA has failed. It only works it's basically a chamber of commerce for, JBS at this point. Maybe I used to work in DC. The best way to scare an agency is to threaten to take away its budget. Like, for example, the Federal Trade Commission oversees antitrust in all the markets in America except meatpacking. USDA has a carve-out. Maybe we take that away from USDA and give it to the Federal Trade Commission. Seventh, I really do think journalists are your friends. See something, say something. Two little examples of this is, one, I was in Western Iowa talking to a banker last summer, and she was telling me Iowa has this great program to control where deer hunters can donate the carcass to a local meat locker. The state pays for it to be processed. It's given away at food pantries. That's great. But she was telling me there was no one's testing for lead in the meat. So I just told this reporter, she did this story, and turns out only Minnesota tests now. Now we know, now people can do it. Another example is in Iowa. If you heard the movie Fargo, you know that mulch scene at the end? A hog confinement owner in Iowa was taking his hog, about 10% of hogs die inside these. He was taking them and throwing them into a mulcher, throwing them on the field, the parts. That's illegal. This older lady in Iowa near Council Bluffs saw it, reported it to the state. The state did nothing. So you know what she did? She told a journalist. In Omaha, it was on the TV news that night, blew up, the state did something. I say this is the power you have is you see company, you don't have to put your name on record, but if you see something wrong, some kind of abuse by a company, let people, journalists know. Or even if you see a story where the journalist got it wrong, it does nothing to get mad at them on Twitter. Send them an email like, hey, there's a whole other side of the story you should really know about. Because keep in mind, most of them, they're not making that much money and they're moving a mile a minute. 8, there's something called a plum book. When you elect a president, you're electing thousands of appointees. Same with governors. Who do you want in these positions of power? Do you want a checkoff person or do you want an RCAP person? I really encourage RCAP with each administration to come with a list. Imagine if all the state USDA directors were RCAP people. These conversations go a lot better if it's your people in those positions of power. Number 9 is writing research. That's how I found out about RCAP, was reading Bill's research in the University of South Dakota Law Review. What should these be? Like, I was just asking someone earlier, what should these meat markets be? We know, what do you do with these meat monopolies now? So start thinking about that now. And finally, join an organization. That's something I realized is you cannot fight these fights alone. Like, for example, that graph I showed you earlier, the beef one, comes because of your membership dues. That information would not exist, and USDA would not put that information out. But that information is so important, and it's so game-changing. It so changes the conversation. And I say this too because my book opens with Julie Dunn. Julie Dunn, she's a retired secretary in Eldora, Iowa, and she spends her retirement fighting against the hog confinements. She's like, we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get there overnight, but she says everything she's doing now is for her grandkid. She doesn't want her grandkids to grow up in the Iowa that she lives in now. And this is a fun little thing, is my last book event was in Iowa Falls, Iowa, which is the hometown of my hog baron. It was the one time I was actually scared doing this. I joked to my spouse, I turned on my phone where you can track me. If I show up in Manure Lagoon the next day, you know why. But it was one of my favorite book events. I had 50 people show up, which you're lucky in New York City if 50 people show up for a book talk. And here's the thing, half the people stayed behind after to tell me this is the lies that we're told. Because guess what, the hog barons, they promised all these things, they didn't deliver, and they left. These people have to live with the consequences, and they're not happy about it. But I say this is, I can't say this enough. I think, especially meat, is one of the most bipartisan things in America right now. It's kind of like that story of blind people touching an elephant, they're describing different things. That's kind of the way I feel like the food system now is. Real change in America happens when weird bedfellows get together. Right now, you have Mike Lee of Utah working with Elizabeth Warren on checkoff reform. You have Cory Booker of New Jersey working with Josh Hawley of Missouri on meatpacking. First of all, where are all the senators in the Great Plains? They should be on all these bills. But that's when things happen. Lean into this broad tent coalition, because that's how real change happens. And on that note, I got 4 minutes left. Happy to take questions. Thank you guys so much. This is such an honor today. Oh, real quick, as people come up. So I'm working on a new thing on Cisco. Cisco has a 50% market share. And part of the reason is why does most diner food kind of taste like meh? That's the goal of this chapter, because it's really hard. Cisco doesn't want to deal with local farmers. They want to deal with the Driscolls. And finally, I want to leave you with this quote, this line. My vision is for any American to sit down at a local diner and just have a good meal, and that everyone along that system was treated with dignity and respect. Because when you start talking about that, you're talking about 1 in 10 of Americans. Never forget the system we have now is radical. It is radical that a Chinese multinational owns the most hogs in America. It is radical that the child poverty is the highest in rural communities. This whole thing is radical. Don't let them tell you otherwise. What we're talking about here is so traditional. Putting animals back on the land is not radical. Any questions? Yeah. Yeah, the book is for sale out front. Happy to sign copies, answer questions. Oh, yeah, the question is the book for sale? It's for sale right behind you, out front. You gotta let me know which Baron you find the most interesting. Walmart's my favorite, because I just love grocery stores. So like when we travel, I love going to grocery stores. So if anyone's from Texas, like HAB is really incredible. If you're from Wisconsin, Woodman's. Anything else? Sorry, it's hard to see with these lights.
What was that legislation you mentioned you'd like to see in the states that we might have?
Packer ban. So the question was, what was the legislation I mentioned earlier? It's called the Packer ban. A lot of Midwest states actually had it in the 70s. Some states, they repealed it or they're not enforcing it. But it's, and I say this as someone married to a lawyer, lawyers make their money when things get gray. What I love about the Packer ban is how simple it is. You cannot own the animal you slaughtered once you're so big.
Over here.
Yeah.
You showed all the brands, the illusion of choice. That's powerful, whether you're growing food or you're consuming food. Has there ever been an effort to force big corporations to boldly put their logo on above the brands so that people can know this is a Cargill product, but the company is XYZ? Would that be effective to inform the consumer?
I'm hesitant just because, for example, you know on menus they put calories? That didn't change. I think most people are just, you're working 9 to 5, you're barely getting by. The problem here is public servants aren't being public servants. You don't have the time to know if a brand's good or not. And there's a whole conversation to have over labeling too. That's why I really push RCAF to push for political appointees one day. Get your people in positions of power. Because so much, by putting it on the consumer, and that's kind of the whole Michael Pollan thing is change the system with your fork. It's just made better food for the yuppies. And like my goal is to make better food for anyone that goes to a Dollar General. Like every American's entitled to good meat. That's my goal. So I mean, yes, I mean there's a lot of organizations out there letting people know here's all these illusions of choice. But I just realized with the calorie count stuff, this is structural stuff. This is power. This is over who has power and who doesn't. Because even if you do that, the thing with JBS is never forget how ruthless they are. So you might get a little bit, but then they'll wind it, they'll buy off some politician a year later, you know what I mean? They roll it back.
Over here.
Okay.
The other day, I was watching a podcast from Josh Hawley, representative senator, whatever, and they were interviewing the Allstate insurance company and had witnesses there to say the fraud that's being committed there. And we've also seen it in the Meat Racket book, where these CEOs make $120, $150 million a year, but the company's not making any money. Now, how do we continue on with that and expect to get a fair price for our product?
I mean, that's the irony of it all, is, how do I say this? The beauty of local companies is they live among their workers. They care, they donate to nonprofits. This consolidation is you get these absentee owners who get these massive paychecks, who are running businesses into the ground. But I think that's why everyone's seeing it not work. It's just the quality is so bad. The customer service is so bad. That's what I'm just so convinced to the core of my body that a Teddy Roosevelt's going to come along. It's just, I have talked about this book in the most random places in America, and I am shocked politically how many different parts of America agree on this stuff. I've been on Glenn Beck's TV show. I've been in Mother Jones' Lefty magazine. It is that kind of, here's the thing, they're not building good businesses when you run a company that way. They don't care. A lot of them, they hop from one industry to the other. They didn't grow up in the industry. Just to talk grocery, for example, the best grocery stores in America now are family owned or privately owned, employee owned. Because they care. They've been doing it their whole life. You talk to a grocery person, they will tell you the most minute detail. They know the livelihood. They know the nuance of these markets. A lot of these people are just vultures. A lot of these executives. They drain it for blood. I can usually tell when a brand's being run by them because you can just kind of feel it. You can just feel capital being extracted for some far off shareholder. But someone will come along though. At some point when you cut corners, you're cutting bone.
As you promote healthy food, that creates healthy citizens. I didn't see any correlation where some of these companies are maybe tied to big pharma, which are influencing 100 plus of our 500 plus legislators at the federal level. Is there a connection there?
So, fun little book fact, because of consolidation in the book industry, all the liability is on me. So if you read my book's only 200 pages, I have 1,000 footnotes. So when you write a book like this, everything's T's are crossed, I's are dotted. To your question, I don't have that skill set to go through. I don't have a science background, so I didn't touch a lot on that. I dance around it. I don't need a PhD to know that Iowa having the second highest cancer rate and it getting worse, it's not because Iowa's fake big a lot. I think most people know what's going on here, but it's also just from my personal protection there are a lot of good other writers out there that do that work. That's not my place to be. Not the skill set I bring.
Yeah, I don't hear so good, but a little bit of what I got. We want checkoff reform. Senator Mike Lee is one of our advocates. But you're saying these big companies like Fairlife actually run the checkoffs, control. Did I get that out of you
Yes.
right? So how does one Mike Lee, how do we overturn the card on the checkoffs then? If the big companies, it's not just NCBA. Bill said we know who our adversaries are in the beef deal, and if they didn't have the checkoff, they wouldn't amount to a fart in a whirlwind. But so expound on the checkoffs just a little more, if you would.
Yeah, I just think vertical integration means a lot of the checkoffs act in the interests of the companies now. On top of it, when there's no disclosure on how money's spent, you're asking for so much self-dealing, so much corruption. That's the biggest thing with the checkoff is no one knows where a lot of the money's going. On a silver lining happy note, one of the most powerful positions at USDA is the Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs. That political appointee oversees, has all the antitrust power in meat and oversees the checkoffs. So imagine a Bill was the Undersecretary for Marketing. You know what I mean? That he could break up the meat companies and go after the checkoffs. And actually, not even go after. Just imagine if you hired auditors. That's what the thing about it is. This isn't rocket science. It's political courage. That's the thing I go back to is, we were talking last night at dinner. So many people now know how broken the checkoffs are. Because it's just, when there's no oversight, it just gets worse and worse. That corruption, you know what I mean? People push the envelope, and it's just getting so ridiculous. And I think the pork one that's the one that's going to be the keel. That's the one that's going to bring it down. Because you can't have the pork checkoff being the voice of a Chinese multinational. Oh, trust me, I said that at Iowa. That's not something you say in Iowa. We done? Well, thank you guys so much. Happy to answer any more questions in the back. yeah, feel free to reach out. Let me know if there's anything I missed in the book. Because honestly, it's events like this that I actually get the best information. Because you live it, you know where I joke, you know where the bodies are buried. And on a final note, I want to thank Bill again. And I also want to thank Mike Calcrate, because both of those men were so influential for me understanding these markets. Thank you guys so much.